Hello and welcome to Daily Debrief, brought to you by People's Dispatch. I'm Swastika, and a very warm and happy Women's Day to everyone out there from our Daily Debrief team. Now let's get into our very first story for the day. The Pentagon has shut down a leak in US naval fuel tank facility in Hawaii after the tank contaminated drinking water for thousands of Hawaiian residents, the Defense Department announced on Monday. The Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility will be defueled as soon as possible, Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin said in a letter on Monday, citing modern fueling needs that have rendered the facility obsolete. According to Austin, the Secretary of the Naval Director of Defense Logistics Agency will provide a 12-month plan to defuel the facility by May 31st, which will include environmental remediation to clean the water the fuel leaked into. Now, to understand this, we have with us Anish. Anish, we have in fact covered this story before on our show. What has taken so long to arrive at this decision?
It's a very good question because we're looking at about 8 decades of possible leaks. At least 73 reported leaks have been come across so far. We do not know how much of that, how many leaks have been covered up by the Navy. Even in the latest case that happened, we are very sure the Navy was trying to cover up or like hide it or at least delay the reporting of the leaks, so that the damage control that they were doing was mostly PR damage control and not really controlling the damage control to the environment and to people's drinking water systems or to people's health in general. This time, a majority of the, or if not a majority, at least a significant bulk of the affected people are military personnel and their families. Of the 93,000 people affected, at least close to a third of them were military families who were also receiving drinking water from the aquifer. And at many instances when this thing was being reported and it was being pointed out, when people were talking about petrol and fuel being seen in the drinking water and beer, that is something very higher levels of leaks we are talking about. It's not like some low level leaks that just happen to have caused by accident. This is like some very proper leak that has happened, that has actually changed the constitution of the water itself. And in that sense, it just created this whole movement that actually also brought both the military families, the affected families, and the residents of Hawaii together in a movement that actually pressured the government, the federal government, to stop this facility altogether. So obviously, the public pressure did work.
Even though the word used was the facility is obsolete, they haven't really said how badly it has contaminated the aquifer.
Exactly. Even the last time when we spoke about it, they were only talking about just temporarily shutting it down and not really decommissioning it. So changes have happened in the last few months. And that shows that the federal government cannot really overlook this kind of tragedy that is unfolding in front of them. I think the estimate says that some 6,000 people had to have professional medical care just because of the leaks. And this was just the latest one. We do not know what happened before that because a lot of things just were not reported very well. And this also shows a certain indifference, long-standing indifference on the part of the federal government and also the military that has been that uses Hawaii as a major Pacific base of itself towards the residents, towards its Aboriginal residents, and to the environment of Hawaii in general.
In fact, it was the struggle of the Hawaiian residents with the US Navy officials who were staying that actually brought this. Mounted the pressure. If you could tell us a little bit more about the struggle.
About the struggle that happened around Red Hills is just one part of it, if you look at it. Because in the case of Hawaiian residents, they have been having issues with the military for a very long time. We are looking at taking over of ancestral lands, traditional lands that are considered sacred by the natives. You're looking at creation of a system which is which creates an economy that has to be centered around the military in many parts of the state, and that actually makes dependencies out of its locals and residents. So even if you do not have a member of your family working in the military, you might be in some way or the other dependent on the very existence of that military for your sustenance, and that is because nothing else happens around there. And this shows a certain long-standing issue that has been usually swept under the carpet when it comes to Hawaii, where the local sovereignty movement, obviously, that existed for nearly a century now, really finding new ways, like issue-based movements, and bringing out the long-standing history of a very acrimonious history that Hawaii has shared with the United States. And that also came out during this time. Obviously, this time they had allies among military families, but also they also got national coverage because, as I said, we spoke about this before, this is one of the largest military fuel tankers. We're talking about close to a billion liters of capacity. And that shows that how it really was important nationally speaking. And that brought out the struggle that has always existed, but has taken a new form.
Thank you, Anish, for those details. Let's see how the environmental remediation now takes place as far as this place is concerned. Yeah. Moving on to our next story. March 8, that is today, women around the world celebrate International Women's Day. In Pakistan, feminists have been organizing large public demonstrations for Women's Day called the Aurat March. This word is Urdu for women. Since 2018, these marches have been going on. Now, the participants of the march have raised sensitive issues such as child rape and sexual abuse, honor killings, and transgender rights that are not given enough space in the politics in Pakistan. Now, the Aurat March has been a phenomenal success, sparking nationwide debates about the rights that women have, but are denied. We have with us Shreya, who could tell us a bit more about, about this movement, really the little bit of the history of this movement and some of the strands that comprise within this movement.
All right. So the Aurat March started in Pakistan 5 years ago in 2008. It really started from Karachi in the fair grounds. It was led initially in Karachi and Lahore by this women's collective called Hum Auratein, and later on it was taken up in different cities like Quetta, Islamabad by different women's organizations that have been participating in the women's movement in Pakistan since earlier, not just before 2018. Okay. So these organizations, they include the Women's Action Forum, which was formed in 1981 as a repulsion to the Hudud Ordinance introduced by Zia-ul Haq during his military dictatorship. And so similar organizations, Women's Democratic Front. Now, Aurat March has in the last 5 years expanded its base, not just in terms of the demands it's making. So it might be called the Aurat Azadi Jalsa, that means the Women's Freedom March. But what really is happening is that it's becoming a larger movement, not just in its base, but also in the demands it's making. So these are not just demands that cater to the women's issues. They have been centered on that, definitely. They've been talking about, like you rightly pointed, abortion rights, but they have also talked about environmental justice. They've talked about reproductive justice, and this year they're talking about reimagining the idea of justice in itself completely. So what they are talking about this year is that how moving from justice as a form of retributive justice, focusing not just on punishment, but making it a survivor-centric justice, what we call as restorative justice. So that's how I think Aurat March is becoming a larger forum that has taken on its participation not just from the women in Pakistan, and also various kinds of groups that are participating, cis women, trans women, the Khwaja Sira community, women coming from religious minorities in Pakistan. But it's becoming rather a discussion on how to see justice this year as a part of a society, how to reimagine justice, what they call as Asal Insaf.
So, Shreya, actually, this movement is also seeing a lot of resistance and a lot of criticism. This is clearly bringing issues around women into the center stage, into the political stage. How would you view the criticism and also the politics behind women rights?
As much momentum the Aurat March has got in the last 5 years, it has got equal amount of opposition and criticism. And most of this comes from the right-wing conservative groups, Islamist groups within Pakistan. So one of the parties, that's Tehreek-e-Labbaik Pakistan, which was unbanned by the current PTI government in November last year, has issued a notice that there is obscenity in these marches, and in a sort of a warning, this obscenity should not be repeated. This has a history that goes back to 2-3 years earlier, where criticism peaked against the Aurat March, and in Islamabad and Lahore High Courts, there was a petition filed to stop these and ban these Aurat marches, which was successfully won by the Aurat March, and they are still being held. So similarly, and now this is not just like an attack from the end of on a national scale. There is also local level attack on the local level administration. So in Lahore recently, the local administration refused to give security to the peaceful demonstrators, for which the organizers had to go to the court again. So for basic things like getting security to peacefully assemble within a city, the Aurat March is facing a lot of opposition. It's coming from political parties. So yeah, Jamiat Ulema Fazl's this is a political party that's always at daggers with the current PTI party. It has released a sort of a warning saying that the obscenity in these marches will be shut down using baton, which is a clear
use of force.
Use of force and clear reference to violence, which is exactly what the march is trying to address through its reimagining of justice. So so that's the kind of opposition it's facing. It's still coming in. However, the current PTI government, which is the Information Minister Fawad Chaudhry, he has said that the government cannot stop its own citizens from having views. So that's what the current scenario is right now, and the march continues to go on. So,
well, more power to more and more women coming to the forefront and putting their voice out there. We need that. So other than today, I hope more issues always get discussed, and Daily Debrief will remain a platform that will bring up women's issues and women's rights always. More and more sports are following the precedent of the International Olympic Committee and banning Russian athletes from competing in the wake of the country's invasion of Ukraine. Russia was barred from competing in international ice skating, skiing, basketball, track and some tennis events after being taken out of soccer competitions and hockey. Now the decisions follow the IOC's request to international sports federations to keep Russian athletes out of events they organize. Now let's go over to Leslie to talk more about this. Leslie, what's the latest on this story?
So when we talk about tennis, you mentioned tennis.
Yes.
Because it's a global sport. It also has a larger reach. It has been in the public domain in discussion for various reasons, including Djokovic's vaccination fight. So Daniil Medvedev is the world #1 Russian, and when you look at the rankings, the official rankings in the website of ATP, the international body, there's no Russian flag next to him. So make of that, I mean, what purpose does it serve? I mean, is it to hide Medvedev's nationality? I just don't understand this move at all, because it doesn't serve anybody's purpose. Apart from the fact that you are trying to alienate and you are trying to target as a blanket attack on all Russians around, be it athletes, or be it normal citizens of Russia. And I believe that artists are also being targeted at this point. So tennis, it's not just some tournaments. The Davis Cup, Russia won't be allowed to compete in. Davis Cup is a nation versus nation competition. So it's as big as the FIFA World Cup in that sense, when countries are involved. Otherwise, tennis is an individual pursuit. Having said that, these athletes are free to compete in the professional circuit without their country being involved, their names, like I said, flags being removed from this. So therein lies the irony of it, that the business of sport will continue going on in pro sport, while athletes competing in amateur sport, or athletes who are actually dependent on the state for their careers, like all the federations that come under the International Olympic Committee, they are all Olympic athletes, and Olympic athletes need support from the state to pursue their careers, train, compete abroad, all these things. So when you expect Russian athletes to speak out against the country, whatever be their stance in this war is. We should always understand also that these are athletes who have to go back and live there, who are also dependent on the government, on the systems that are in place there for their sustenance, for their. It's not just about safety or the freedom to express. It's also about their careers. So when the international sporting body, and we have addressed this issue earlier as well,
Yes.
they're selectively putting out this outrage because this is not just the only global conflict that has happened in the past 20 years. The sporting establishment has not acted at all previously, be it against the US, be it against Israel or any of the aggressors in the past. They have come out now. So that therein lies the politics that is in place. And at the same time, now that they have come out and they are urging each and every federation to come out and target these athletes. The latest being yesterday when the International Shooting Federation have decided to put a ban on all Russians. It just kills the entire purpose. Now what is happening is that I believe that the signal to give out what's the purpose this ban is supposed to serve, it's being lost. It's just ban, 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 and after that what? The war is going on. What difference is it making? So
Also,
sports should have acted in a sporting diplomacy where they could have put out statements, but they also allow these athletes to have that stage and possibly to speak out as well. Because even during the Cold War, height of Cold War, when sport was used as propaganda and US and Russian athletes were competing against each other, knowing that a victory or defeat is actually serving the propaganda of one nation or the other. They still competed because they understood the value of sport to cut across various boundaries and send out that signal, whatever that signal that was. That is being lost here. No purpose is being served. That's the whole sad point of this episode.
And even from the sporting community, have any members spoken out about this? Any Russian sports persons?
It so happens that recently, a few days back, Ivan Kuliak, who is a gymnast, that happens to be one of the first, so-called pro-war symbolism in a way. At the podium of the World Apparatus Gymnastics Championship in Doha, Qatar, he was standing next to the gold medalist, was a Ukrainian. He won bronze. He was standing on the podium and he wore a Z alphabet on the jersey. He was obviously not wearing a Russian tracksuit. He's not allowed to. And so the tanks and the Russian military equipment which went across the border into Ukraine during the conflict, it all carried this alphabet Z. So it has been connected with that, and it's been said that the athlete, the presence of that alphabet in his jersey is a sign that he is in support of the war. And so the internal committee of the Gymnastics Federation, they are discussing this point, and there possibly a life ban is in cards. So this is one of the. He has not come out on media and spoken about it, but this overt symbolic gesture has happened. So that's one of the first cases that has happened. Otherwise, there have been a couple of tennis players who have come out and said no war, we need peace. Yes. All these messages have come out. Of course, athletes themselves are not getting into the politics of this. Like I mentioned earlier, there are certain constraints which they have to adhere to as well, and probably, you can't call them fence-sitters in that sense, because this is a larger issue that is happening. It is war we are talking about. It's not a socio-political cause that they can stand up and talk. So they have to be careful about what they talk, what they not talk. So I perfectly support them for taking that stance.
Thank you, Leslie, for those details. We will be following up on the Ukraine-Russian crisis as well from our side. Well, that's all that we have from our team in Daily Debrief. Keep following People's Dispatch and do come back tomorrow.